Hello everyone, and welcome back to the Midcast. This is the third installment of the podcast series? Series. Let's call it a series. I hope everyone had a good holidays or good Christmas. I had a very good Christmas myself. Lots of interesting gifts. Lots of interesting things happened. Lots of good food. Lots of good cookies. So, let's get right into things. A bit of an update to the channel and how things will progress. I have recently come into receiving Sony Vegas 18 from my sort of outdated previous editing software. So I will be able to experiment with a couple of different spectrograms, maybe for the audio. Maybe I might change up the background. I'm not sure yet. I will see how things go and progress. This is a very new channel, very new brand, so I'm definitely exploring my options. But let's get into today's topic. And if you remember last week's topic, we talked about crimes occurring in video games, like actual crimes. But I didn't really touch on games about crime. Very fine line there. I'm sure if you are in the gaming scene, you've at least heard of the game called Payday, or Payday 2, or the nebulous and very, obscure Payday 3 that should be coming out sometime next year. Games about crime are very interesting to me. Payday 2 is a bunch of missions and bank heists and that sort of deal. That's what the whole game's about. You play as a criminal and you steal and you get money. That's the general basis of it. And the reason this is very interesting to me is that a lot of games that approach crime do so in a very Hollywood-like manner. And to kind of elaborate on that, Hollywood-like manner is a very... what's the word I'm looking for? Blown out of proportion, a very false sense of what crime actually is. Now, of course, a bank heist is always going to be a bank heist, and the glorification of that might just seem obvious in many cases. Obviously, you don't want the boring, the gritty things in the video game you are playing for fun. That's why you play video games, you get away from the boring stuff. Although, when it comes to cybercrimes, specifically, like hacking and all these other mechanics that you might find in games, they are sorely, and I mean sorely, inaccurate. Most games that portray cybercrimes and hacking and stuff go about as far as, clicking a couple things in a specific order or playing like a little maze game, like Grand Theft Auto 5, good example. A lot of the hacking is literally playing Snake, right? It's like a similar version of Snake or something like that, like a maze game. Which, obviously, very inaccurate, but most people realize, this hacking is not this. But there are some games that try to sell you on a more authentic hacking experience, which, again, is not actually the most accurate of things. Like Watchdogs, a perfect example of this. While it does portray itself as a very serious kind of cybercrime game, its portrayal of hacking is still very much false. It's very glorified, very simplistic, obviously, for the player to understand, because real hacking is, well, quite frankly, if you're not into it, it's very boring. Perhaps if you are on the cusp of stealing millions of dollars in assets, that is a different story. That could be quite exciting. But a lot of it is behind the scenes work. You're like screening for vulnerabilities. You're looking for all these other things that you could use. You're writing scripts. You're, pen testing the companies or penetration testing, seeing like, well, what they're going to fall for, what they're not going to fall for, and that sort of thing. And breaching like a company can take a very, very long time. So, because of that, games opt to have a more fast-paced, interesting, but obviously inaccurate approach. I will say, there is one instance of hacking in a video game that I've come across that I would say is actually fairly accurate. And it's not actually hacking, though. It is a Minecraft mod called Computercraft. And that you might be like, okay, this guy is about to lie to me. He's about to. How can a Minecraft mod be the most accurate sort of hacking or whatever that he's ever seen? Well, let me tell you, Computercraft. When you place down the computer, it is literally just scripting. It is literally just like a command prompt or a PowerShell prompt. It is literally just that, and that is as close as I've ever seen in a game. Period. Like, you got hacking in Fallout 4, which is just clicking on variables that are inside brackets, not very accurate. You have Deep Rock Galactic, which has a very just, what's the word? It's like a timing game, essentially. That's all hacking actually is. And then you have, like I said, Watchdogs, more games that are like, it's nitty gritty, you're kind of jacking into the system, you're clicking buttons, but at the end of the day, it's never that easy. Stealing information takes a while. You have to, use packet sniffers, go on public networks, try to find things. It's a whole ordeal. There's lots of different ways of doing it, and games don't ever really portray that well. Going back to the Payday series of games, fantastic set of games. I've been playing a lot of Payday 2 recently, and I'm quite excited for Payday 3, if that does actually come out next year. Payday, this as a series, and more normal crimes is decently good at portraying a more, boots on the ground approach to just crime generally. Obviously, there's not thousands and thousands of cops swarming a bank at once, of course, that's insanity. And obviously, you're not able to take more than one bullet typically. Although, the procedures to get into the bank are very long and time consuming, at least for the game's standards. And generally, there's like a pre-planning phase as well, and say like have more lore-wise that takes a couple of days and stuff. The game is probably the closest you're gonna get to like a authentic just crime experience, which is why Payday 2 is just a great game. It's a little janky. If you're not sure about Payday 2, you haven't played it much, or you're not very aware of what's going on with it. It was built on a engine that was made for race cars, like as in like a game engine that was made for racing games. Like, not really sure what they called these days, because there's so many different like racing car games. But you know what I mean. You've probably seen them on the shelves at a GameStop. You drive a fast car around a track and you win. That's the basic gist of it. It was made on an engine for that purpose. But Payday 2 is a first-person shooter game. So, as you can imagine, having a game that is very different from a racing game, it's a bit janky. It's a bit weird. Things will go through walls when they're not supposed to. It's a mess. It's a bit of a mess, but it's a fun game. It's a fun game. It's a bit old too. It's actually in a bit here. When the new year comes, it'll be about 10 years old, a full decade. It's relatively cheap and on sale. By the time this podcast comes out, this installment, it should still be on sale for relatively cheap. I recommend picking it up if you haven't. And Payday 3 is a game we know nothing about for the most part. We have, I think, 3 pieces of concept art, and that's about it. I am still looking forward to it, though, because if Payday 2 has turned out to be a fun game, I'm hoping its younger sibling is equally as good. I also wanted to talk a bit how hacking in video games is, I am saying it's inaccurate, but it's fun to see the takes game developers have on hacking. You can definitely tell by like the method they go for how familiar they are with the like presence of hacking and like what it actually is versus like the more Hollywood version of it, and that sort of thing. Like Grand Theft Auto, for example, it's a really gritty kind of game, very slow paced sometimes, very fast paced on others. Depends on like what you're doing. And you got all these like little things, all these little hacking mini games, but it's usually just like wire crossing, mix and match, snake, like I mentioned earlier. So there's obviously it's playful in its attempts to portray hacking. It's definitely not meant to be the most serious type of hacking ever. And like I mentioned with Watchdogs, it's Watchdogs is super serious, kind of edgy, and kind of, you pull out your phone, you do all these different things. And I don't like that as much. I think if you're not gonna, leave hacking as like a, what's the word? Like just an entirely different version of hacking. If you wanted to actually try to like accurately portray it, you should actually accurately portray it. I'm not saying make the player make a script that takes a couple of hours. No, that's not fun for the mass majority of people. I would say if you're looking to really seriously and to kind of immerse your player in like what real hacking is, have the character you play as do most of it, and then kind of just like guide the player through what hacking kind of is. Obviously, don't teach them how to make actual payloads and stuff, because that's the equivalent of Breaking Bad teaching you how to make meth, right? That's not exactly the best way to go with these things. So, I would opt for a more playful approach to it, a more like fun, stylized approach to hacking in a video game, because I feel like then the player's like, wow, this is very interesting, this is very in depth, this is actually accurate. If they weren't aware of it before, like, wow, this is what hacking kind of actually supposed to be. Because you don't really see that much of it ever. Yeah, that's a bit of a shame. If there is any games out there that you are familiar with that does actually portray hacking as what it actually is, please let me know. I am very interested in this. I just haven't come across a game that has accurately done it before. An interesting idea of hacking that I've recently just thought of, if you've ever played Warframe, I think this version of hacking only shows up about once or twice throughout the entirety of the game through quests or something like that. They have what is called an Orokin cipher. And this cipher is actually interesting because it is, in truth, a cipher. Although it is very basic, of course. It is a game. You can't have anything too crazy. But you have to kind of go out in the level that you play in and find bits and pieces of this cipher and then piece it together at the terminal, and then you unlock it. And this is, in a roundabout way, a bit like a decryption key for a string that is encrypted. That's generally how encryption works. If you're not too familiar, is when you encrypt something, you usually do so with a key, so you can later decrypt it at some point. That is how you manage to send data to and from without it being intercepted at any point. In fact, many games that have puzzles that need you to find the solution, essentially, you need to go out searching for it, or actually kind of like decipher something, that is more accurately, portraying, hacking, deciphering, that sort of thing, than most other games do in a more computer sense, if that makes sense. So, for example, if you're playing a medieval game, but you can only open the magical door with a specific set of items, or you need to say out loud like a certain phrase, that is more akin to something like a password. It is technically, in a weird weird sense more accurate to what security actually is than like a puzzle game. Like I mean, like mixing and matching wires on a robot or something. Now, is that more fun? That's a very subjective subject, obviously. More people have fun with mixing and matching wires than opening a magical stone door with a passphrase. But I do think these are just very interesting ways of going about it. I do think that we definitely need more games about crime, generally. There's not too many of them out there, honestly. The only ones I can actually think of are Payday 2, and eventually Payday 3, the original Payday, and there's some stretches out there, right? There's like Borderlands 2, which is like, you're not really the good guy, but you're not really the bad guy either. It's not directly about crime, though, which is why it's a bit of a stretch. Of course, you have games like Watchdogs, like I mentioned earlier. But to my knowledge, there's not too much more than that, honestly. Now, you have your games like Skyrim, right? That you can commit crimes, but the focus of the game is not about committing those crimes. The focus of the game is you are the Dragonborn. You are here to slay dragons. So, I think games that kind of focus more on the different aspects of like, robbing a bank, hacking the systems, hacking the cameras, that sort of thing. That's something I wish was explored a little more, One of my favorite series of video games growing up was actually the Splinter Cell series with Sam Fisher. It was a series of stealth games where you would sneak around and be a cool secret agent and do all these different things. And in a sense, it's not really much of a crime because I think you were actually going after the people committing acts of terrorism and things like that. That was the point of the game, I believe. But I was very young, so I didn't really pay attention to that part of it. But games that kind of flip that on its head. You are the stealth assassin committing crimes. Like, I suppose Hitman in a way is that, but you are the hitman. That's the game. Like, it doesn't focus on other parts of robbing a place, doing this, doing that. But I've never played the Hitman series, so there may be some missions that do require you to steal something or steal multiple things, but not in the heister sense, the Payday 2 heister sense that really gets your blood going as you're drilling open the vault. Grand Theft Auto 5 does a little bit of this where you can, drill into a bank and etc., grab money, but Grand Theft Auto is, old. Quite old. There is that Grand Theft Auto 6 coming out at some point in the future. So that will be our next crime game, I suppose, besides Payday 3. But I would like to see more unique spins on it, We have, the bank heists, and I would like to see more things that maybe focus more on, like, cyber crimes and all these other things. Because it is a new field that I think should have more awareness to it. Ever since 2020 especially, cybercrime has been on the rise, and having it portrayed in video games may not only raise awareness for many, but it would have just a very unique and interesting premise. I'm curious if there's any games out there, I think I may have mentioned this earlier, that kind of follow this, what I'm looking for. Please let me know. I'm always interested in new experiences and different games. Kind of heister games and that sort of thing has always been my cup of tea. I will mention there is one game that has actually just come to mind that I played for a very brief period of time, maybe a year or two ago, called Thief. Was not the original Thief. I am aware that there is an original one. I played, I think, 2015. I believe it came out 2016, somewhere around there. I remember this because there was a promotion for it in Team Fortress 2 where if you bought Thief, you would get in-game cosmetics. But I do remember playing Thief. Thief was a good game. It was obviously about stealthing around and stealing things like a thief would. Had very interesting mechanics, and it was a lot of fun. I'm not exactly sure why I stopped. It had this kind of interesting, thrill to it. Although the game did feel kind of bare bones at points. It did feel very like once you understood everything, it wasn't really much of a challenge anymore. You would just kind of breeze to and from like very similar levels. But perhaps me not finishing the game has, obviously skewed my perception of it. So I will go back and see if I can form a new opinion on it. I might just start it off from the beginning so I make sure I catch myself up with the story and other things like that. But the mechanics of stealing things stuff was fun. That was a lot of fun. I do think it is, in a sense, therapeutic to play these games. I think one more game that I can think of that kind of covers crime generally is Saints Row. It's a older series, if I'm aware. I think a new game came out very recently, though I believe it was not well received. I do remember the one from 2013, or somewhere around then. That was still pretty decent. I remember me being as young as I was, I would watch lots of videos on YouTube about this game. And I believe it was a very kind of super mega glorified, you have superpowers, you're running around in like almost like a virtual reality kind of like thing. That was like kind of the plot of it. Of course I could be wrong. It's been, how long has it been? It's been 9 going on 10 years since I've really looked into the game. But it would be, that is an interesting concept Saints Row has, where it's like these superheroes or these very powerful people, doing these crimes, jumping from building to building, and everyone's just doing these crazy, fantastical things. I think that's a lot of fun. That's a fun, unique concept, but it is a shame that the newest installment is, not well received. They must have rushed it or something to that effect. That's a topic for another episode of this podcast, is rushing things in video games. It's been a shame to see a lot of these games go downhill because of that. But to get back on topic, I do think that I have pretty much exhausted everything I would want to say in this episode. I do see that it is going to be a bit of a shorter installment. But I'm just starting out, and I am trying to kind of get my groove, trying to see what sticks and what doesn't. The first episode of this podcast was very, kind of more scripted, had a lot of bullet points, and the last 2 have been kind of more freeform. And if there is anyone out there willing to share an opinion with me, please let me know what you think. Should it be more freeform? Would you like more like super deep research into it, or does it not matter to you? I'm very interested to hear these questions. So, with that, I will wish you all a good night, good evening, or good morning, wherever you are. This has been your host, Mid. Adios.